Welcome to New Realities. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and this program is about the exploration of consciousness. And nothing encapsulates what consciousness is, what the embodied spirit in flesh is all about, than understanding the dimensions and parameters of creation. And what I mean by that is the field of sacred geometry. Sacred geometry, you could say, is the mathematics of creation, how we have incarnated into a life form, and how that's represented in the world of mathematics, in the world of harmonic ratios. It is the most exciting subject that you can imagine. And I'm here with Roger Green, who's going to be hosting a conference on that, and my good friend Natasha Pelak, who doesn't know anything about sacred geometry.
Oh, but I know a little bit.
You know, what do you know about sacred geometry? Let's start there. Because you're like the person off the street, and like, if I asked you, what is sacred geometry, what would you say?
I would say that it's based in a golden ratio.
What does that mean?
Well, for every sound that comes out of our bodies, for every movement that we make, it's built on this planet, which is basically, it's how I see it, is heaven on earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a perfect union of how we function, and our consciousness is anchored here on the planet, and how that functions within our bodies. Mm-hmm. So we see it a lot of times in dance and in athletics.
Well, how would you describe the golden ratio? Because the golden ratio is really key to sacred geometry.
Nature uses several major ratios, and of course the golden ratio is the #1 ratio, because it's the one that can bring the sort of vibrational, invisible, conscious world into physical manifestation.
So the golden ratio, of course, Leonardo da Vinci
celebrated it.
So it's like, is it the ratio?
You can see it in the body, this ratio from this segment to of your finger to the next segment, this segment to the next.
Is there also the ratio of like the shoulder to the tip of the finger? That's one length, and the ratio of that from the elbow to the thing. But you know, that's different than everyone, isn't that length?
Nature uses the golden mean ratio in terms of it's the underlying force, but of course there's slight variations with every sort of person on the planet. But if you were to get like a group of 30 people and measure their elbows, you'd get an average that would be basically the golden mean ratio. So it's always, nature's sort of always pushing these ratios out to their limits. You know, and hence, now nature uses these ratios for growth, for, you know, gestation, for, you know, the whole process of life itself.
They're in every life form?
Everything.
Everything.
Galaxies, you know, your DNA, everything is you know, has a ratio, a resonance, a proportion to it. You know,
well, one of my favorites is definitely the labyrinth.
The labyrinth one. But doesn't it show you there's like a science to life? That life is not
exactly
some accidental freak of nature. I mean,
there's an intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah.
And let's forget God.
And it's a way the human...
well, no, because people get caught up in theology and miss
some external force going on.
And they miss, like, what nature's, the substance of it. Yeah. So what were you going to say? There's
well, no, I was just going to elaborate further, you know, with, you know, well, it's been used in, for instance, from classical times, of course, and in architecture, and that's one of the, you know, now, you could also say that sacred geometry has been lost for the last, you know, 1,000-odd years. And it's only in the last, you know, 50 years that we've started to capture it again, you know. And, you know, for instance, we used to have this for our sacred places, we used to have this for our architecture, and, you know, often with modern architects, you ask them about the golden mean ratio and they've never heard about it.
Wow.
You know, and
you know, the other thing about the golden mean ratio is, though, when you look at it, it creates a harmony.
It's the harmonics of beauty.
Yes, beauty, yes. You know, so if we look at Natasha's face, right?
A perfect example of the golden mean ratio.
No, we will. Where do we see it in her face? No, because we see it in the measurement of the whole face to the eyes, from the eyes to the top of the head. You also see in there, it's perfectly proportioned, just
thank
like
my mother.
Natasha.
Thank you, Mom and Dad.
No, right? I mean, isn't that we see it in the face and the lips and the eyes?
And in the structure of the teeth, you see it everywhere.
It's amazing. You see it everywhere.
Thank
you know, science, you know, so nature is using these ratios and proportions all the time. Now, what we can do with our human intention is use mathematics and physics to start to measure this, and what's happening now is we're discovering, in quantum physics, that everything is sacred geometry now, right down to the the radii of the hydrogen is actually a golden mean ratio. And the hydrogen, of course, is the building blocks of the whole universe.
The radius of a hydrogen atom to what, though?
To the electrons, to the protons.
Really?
That whole energy field is, put together with the golden mean ratio.
So, what can we do?
Tesla.
What can we do with it?
Tesla used it.
In the most cutting edge of physics, in quantum physics, El Nashi from Egypt, and all the cutting edge, quantum physics. What can we do with it? Well, that can be our new energy systems for the world.
With a system based on a sacred proportion.
Because, as in nature, it's going to be efficient.
Yep.
That's the whole deal here. Nature uses these ratios because it's the most efficient way to, bring energy or chi from the universe into our bodies, and all the energetic systems of nature use these ratios for absolute efficiency. Nature doesn't waste anything, as you know. So we could use this for new energy systems, and that's where the really interesting science is going.
Were you saying something about Tesla?
Yes, Tesla was well ahead of his time, and we're now just beginning to catch up with a lot of his work. And as far as I know, he uses sacred geometry to wrap the different coils.
And it uses Tesla coil?
Yeah, it absorbs vibrations, not only just from this. I mean, what he says and what Guy Belinsky says is that he's able to encapsulate energy from the cosmos, which is in inevitably the quantum field, and then able to move electricity along its path. To our cell phones and our tablets and our computers.
So, but let's talk about the conference that's coming up. We can talk about that a little bit. So, who's coming? You're doing this conference April
the 4th through to the 13th. And so it's a whole week of several teachers from all over the world. For instance, Robert Lawler from
Robert
Australia.
Lawler is the best.
He's like the grandfather of one of the grandfathers of modern sacred geometry.
Well, not just sacred geometry. He's an Egyptian expert. He translated the
Temple of Man.
thick book of Schwaller de Lubitsch, The Temple of Man. This is have you seen that? It's you have seen it?
I've seen it all.
The 2-volume set of The Temple of Man.
And of course, he wrote that book, Sacred Geometry, in the 70s
for the English company.
That's right, where they did it. And it's still he's still selling it.
I think I have 2 copies of it.
And he pretty much was one of the instigators of the whole modern sacred geometry movement.
But not only that, he's also an expert on Indian yugas. And he's also...
His latest book is about the sacred geometry of time. Most of the time we're looking at it in terms of space, proportion, design, etc. But of course there's this dynamic relationship between time and space, which you can use sacred geometry for. So he's done this very deep. Took him 7 years.
Is that out yet, that book?
It's out now on Kindle.
Is it?
Yeah, so if you were to go to
Sacred
Amazon,
Geometry of Time.
Robert Lawler.
Only on Kindle? It's not. Is it?
It's only on Kindle at the moment.
Is he looking for a publisher or whatnot?
Possibly, yes.
I might know a publisher.
But so he's doing a weekend workshop, and he's coming from all the way from Australia. And this guy doesn't often teach. Well, it's a very rare occasion.
No, but the other thing about Lawler, he's also an expert on Australian Aborigines.
That's right.
So he has the
He lives
Hindu.
in a very sacred place in Australia, off the coast of Melbourne.
He has the Hindu. He has the Egyptian. He has the Aboriginal, Australian Aboriginal. I mean, and he also compares these ancient cultures with each other and shows the commonality in that. He is a genius, Natasha. Do not miss him.
And we also have Scott Olson. Scott Olson has...
I've interviewed Scott.
Yes, and he's got a PhD in religious studies, and he's a lecturer at a university in Florida. So he's doing a whole day on the transformation of consciousness using sacred geometry, but from a shamanic perspective, and also for instance, in the near-death experiences, people when you ask them to draw what they sort of journey through, you often end up, you might have seen this, the lattice, the spiral, and so forth, and there's an absolute consistency in their experiences.
Of these forms?
Yeah, of what they're visually seeing when they go down their near-death experience, so to speak. And that's pretty much like the DNA starting to unravel and leave the body, and of course the DNA is made up of all of these beautiful sacred geometry principles. So he's going to be exploring near-death experiences through a sacred geometry perspective.
Wow, great. Who else you got?
Well, we've got Mark Hanf from North Carolina.
Oh, I've met Mark.
An interesting guy, wonderful guy. He's been involved, of course, with Bucky Fuller Institute for many, many years.
Is he the guy who also talks about the Sri Yantra?
He does.
Yeah, about the Sri Yantra?
He also does, we've done a blending of sacred geometry and the feng shui of China. So his workshop is called the Tao of Geometry. And he's done this beautiful, like, sacred geometry has been in all of the ancient world, across the board, east and west.
Right,
so
China and India and Greek and Roman and Hebrew.
So Mark does this wonderful perspective of looking at all the symbols, the logos, you know, the hidden palace, all of these.
The yin-yang.
The yin-yang symbol, exactly.
He uses that a lot, the sine wave curve between the yin and the yang.
And we've got Lance Harding, who's also got a PhD.
Who's that? I haven't met him.
He's an interesting character. He hides away in Ohio. And here comes Lance now.
He's landing.
And he's an expert on Egyptian sacred geometry. And there's a theme, one of the highest levels of achievement in sacred geometry drawing is to be able to draw what we call basically the Egyptian human.
What does that mean?
Well, it's to get the exact proportions like they did in ancient Egypt. You know, that we've discovered in the temples and so forth.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very high achievement.
The exact
to be able
proportion
to do
of the human?
of the Egyptian human.
And why is that so? There's something about that.
Well, it's just that when you get into the art and craft of this, that's one of the high achievements that you can do in terms of drawing. So you must remember that people also use sacred geometry for meditation and for art.
Oh, by staring yantras or mandalas.
Well, it's also a beautiful experience just drawing these patterns. It's just a wonderful internal experience, you know.
You know, there's a whole thing about the cubit, you know, being a sacred proportion. The cubit itself, I don't know how big a cubit is, but it's like the ideal proportion. And do you know that guy Slim Sperling who would make
yes.
Actually, you put these round cubits on you, and it had a healing effect just because of the sacredness of that length or something.
Right.
Yeah, it's when you are aware, have an awareness of it, your consciousness is around something like that, like the crop circles.
Well, of course, the crop circles.
It is known, the crop circles I know for a fact are known to open up faculties in the right side of the brain, and then pushing the person into the frontal lobes.
Well, even that, what Natasha's wearing, that's a Chinese coin. You know, there's the circle, and also the circle, the ratio of the circle to the square.
Yeah, that's of course another really big theme in sacred geometry.
Squaring the circle.
Yeah,
and
there's so many theories, and that's again one of the highest achievements that you can.
Is squaring the circle, which means.
Well, I know the Masons use a lot of the squares and the circles and the angles.
Yes, that's big
right.
too. I mean, Masonry is still a secret science.
Well, it's based in Galileo's.
I don't think it's a secret anymore.
The Masonic,
of course, that used to be. We're now in the information age, so they're no longer.
It's readily available.
I still think there's some secrets. Don't you think?
Well, the G.
Pythagoras.
Not everyone knows that the G in that we see everywhere that stands for geometry. And so it was
the G in the Masonic symbol.
Yes, you see it all over the place.
Makes sense.
Well, it's the T square they have there.
And Galileo was the first to prove this concept that the Earth revolves around the sun.
No, maybe
was it Galileo?
That
was sacred geometry applied.
I think it was Copernicus, but Galileo, maybe Galileo proved
it into reality. And he did it with an eclipse. That's how he was able to prove it. And so it was a matter of proving proportions
well, I was just going to ask, okay, what do people get it?
Well, we've got Dan Winter and Bill Donovan.
Dan Winter.
So,
who I've interviewed here on New Realities.
So, you know, like what do you, what can you get from this? Like, getting back to the science of sacred geometry and how you can apply it to the real world.
Yeah.
So, you know, like more efficient agricultural systems, ways to magnetize water so that you get stronger yields.
So you say if we
better
base
efficient
our
energy systems.
mechanics, our industry on sacred geometric structures, they'll be more proficient, less waste. There's something in the mechanics as opposed.
Well, nature in itself is perfect. You know, and so if we adopt some of those principles, and that's what Buckminster Fuller, who I feel was somewhat of a master with sacred
way ahead of his
geometry,
time.
Yeah, a genius.
that was definitely making things hyper efficient. You know, so that's wonderful that you're having this conference and inviting these experts and bringing these people together.
No, I just want to curious. So your website,
AcademySacredGeometry.com.
AcademySacredGeometry.com.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's happening here in Manhattan.
April
the 4th through to the 13th. So we've got a variety of, like, there's evening workshops, there's one-day workshops, there's some afternoon seminars, so it's a real variety that people can choose from.
You've been at this for, what, 20 years now?
And I've been sponsoring these teachers for a long time, and I'm getting involved more with some of their inventions and so forth. I've also been involved with Feng Shui and Chinese medicine.
Oh, right, and nutrition.
Yeah, the Academy Healing Nutrition I've been running here for several years now. Well, that's a curriculum that I've run for nearly 30 years.
And what's the website for that?
Academy Healing Nutrition.
Yeah, exactly.
We're into the academy.
But you know what the best thing though about what you've done is that you found the experts in the field. Actually, Dorothea is,
and of course we must mention Dorothea Rockburn,
who has a show now at the Museum of Modern Art. She has a whole room
and
to herself.
She's been inspired by sacred geometry since a teenager.
To make her art.
And she uses sacred geometry in all of her art.
I have to say, I don't really understand what she's doing. You know, where she
doesn't matter because her artwork is just absolutely beautiful.
But she talks about what, planes, and maybe you would understand. What's her key thing? Morphology. The way different planes intersect with each other. I mean, it's very abstract and advanced. I mean, it's brilliant. But it's interesting, and she's passionate about it.
She uses a lot of mathematics in her artwork.
I would like to understand what she's doing. I mean, I guess I just have to sit down and study it. I mean, it's worth studying. I mean, I think if you understand sacred geometry...
Well, you can feel that too. You don't actually have to study her artwork because it's an underlying presence there that emanates out of her artwork.
You know, I think if we really understand the works of sacred geometry and appreciate the works of Dorothea, we start to tap into the mystery. Yeah. And we realize that because our bodies are built on these principles, that we're part of the mystery.
Yep.
It's us. Everything about us is sacred in a proportion.
I can drink to that.
Okay. That's not so sacred. Sacred meat.
Maybe tea. Maybe drinking tea. Ladies and gentlemen, tea.
No, that's great. So the website again is,
AcademySacredGeometry.com.
Okay, yeah, no, I'm very excited that you're putting this together. It's really, really brilliant. And you're just inspired. You just know these people. You call them up and say, hey, Robert.
I've sponsored sacred geometry events, you know, for a couple of decades now around the world, and here in New York for the last 10 years.
But why are you so passionate about it? That's what I'm interested in.
Well, for me, it was a full circle, to tell you the truth. I got involved earlier on with Taoism and Chinese medicine, and I've been running natural health courses, and then Feng Shui became popular in the early 90s, and I had already written a Feng Shui curriculum back in Sydney, Australia, before it became popular. I became very, very busy with Feng Shui, with conferences, with training courses all around the world. And then I started to go, well, hang on a minute, we've got our own, what's our own Western Feng Shui?
Right,
you know?
What's the sacredness in the West?
Yeah, and of course that brought me to sacred geometry. In fact, Dan Winter was one of my first teachers there. And so for me that was like full circle. So then my conferences became Feng Shui, sacred geometry, and ecological design. Because I think those three, you've got something incredible, you know, to use those, you know, because now you've got kind of all of the tools to use.
Yeah, that's really harmonic.
So that's how I came to this. You know? And now for me, you know, just studying the Western esoteric traditions, I think we have to bring that alive again. And there's a lot of great, deep knowledge there that we can now use in a time that we really need it.
You know, Roger brings up a good point, because people look to the East, to spirituality and mysticism, and the West has an incredible mystical tradition, from alchemy and the building of the Gothic cathedrals, and even tarot, and everything that comes out of Egypt filtered into the Greeks, that filtered into the Romans, that created Western civilization as we know it.
In the ancient Sumerian times.
So we're building even astrology, you know, the stars, dividing things into 12 and 360. I mean, everything we use today is founded in the Western mystical tradition. Even chemistry, you know, chemistry, astronomy, it's all based on the mystical science. What do you have to say about that, Natasha?
I think alchemy.
Can you be our alchemy cover girl?
I am.
Well, no, that's good. Thanks, Rogers. Let's show like a little clip of some of the past conferences. What do you want to show? Yeah.
Well, there's some material that I got from Vincent Bridges.
Oh yeah, just tell us who Vincent Bridges is.
Vincent Bridges, I would consider like the encyclopedia of Western esoteric traditions here in North Carolina. Right. He now lives in Prague.
In the home of, in the house of John Dee.
John Dee.
John Dee,
this guy's an absolute expert on sacred geometry and all the mystical traditions, right back to the Mary Magdalene and you name it.
Can he do what John Dee? I mean, John Dee, you know, destroyed the Spanish Armada because it was coming to invade England in the time of Queen Elizabeth. I mean, he brought down the forces of heaven through. Does Vincent know how to do that?
You have to ask him. I think he's still trying.
He's still trying.
He does some interesting rituals.
Vincent does.
Yeah.
He would be an interesting person to meet.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've got some clips from Bill Donovan. Bill Donovan is an American genius.
He is.
An absolute genius.
I think Bill is. And what a nice guy.
Yeah. An incredible guy.
I have some clips of Dan Winter I'll show.
Yeah, Dan Winter, and we've got a little bit of Mark Hanf doing some teaching. And
okay, let's show all that, and got that in. And thank you for watching. So I've been here with Roger Green and Natasha
Pelak. I'm Natasha Pelak.
And I got you mixed up with Roger. Any final words, Natasha? Anything you want to tell?
You knew a lot about sacred geometry, you know, for somebody just off the street.
Yeah.
What would you like to leave for people to leave to inspire them, maybe to come to the conference, to investigate more sacred geometry? What would you like to leave people?
I would like people to close their eyes, look inside of themselves, and imagine how their soul links into their DNA and their consciousness. And when they open their eyes, express how they feel and send their picture to me.
I'm going to her workshop.
Send their picture to you?
Yeah, that they drew, or anything that they wrote, anything that
That's
they were
a great
inspired.
idea.
So you can send it to me, natashapelak@gmail.com. Look forward to your drawings.
Any final words about sacred geometry and inspiration? What you want people to?
Well, I just encourage people to perhaps, pick up a book on sacred geometry. I encourage people to do some of the drawings, some of the exercises, because it's
actually will align their brain just by drawing that. Yes.
Come to the conference, of course, and experience, it's just wonderful to be around people who have been studying this for 30, 40 years.
It's so much. There's a proportion to the universe. The proportion, I think Kepler talked about the proportion of the planets, Mercury to the Sun to Venus. Science.
There's some wonderful books out. You've seen the Woden books, that whole series.
Yeah,
beautiful
they're small
books on
little
sacred
books.
geometry.
Yeah, they are beautiful.
And all the planetary, proportions and so forth that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I want to say
written down.
Though that Western science thinks this is all arbitrary, that the planets just show up. They don't understand that there's this force that is creating the universe. It's not like just stars bombarding into each other. There is a consciousness, there's a design, there's an overriding principle, and then people get caught up in, like I said before, in this concept of God, but it's not God. It's an underlying formation of life. And that's why I'm so excited about this, because you know, when we understand or start to tap into the principles of sacred geometry, we start to understand why we're here, what life's about, how life is generated to create more consciousness.
Right.
You know who's a great person is William Brown, Life in the Universe. He's new on the scene, and he's somebody you really like. He's out of Nassim school, but but he's
there's
great.
Another person we should honor.
Nassim Haramein.
Yeah.
But William Brown, check him out. He's quite a young genius.
Yeah.
You don't know him. Huh?
I don't know.
We'll check him out. Thank you, Roger.
Call him up tomorrow.
This is Alan Steinfeld for New Realities. Thanks for watching tonight. If you want to reach me, I'm at newrealities@earthlink.net. Check my website, newrealities.com, and tune in to the Sacred Geometry.